we're going to start. And then people,
Absolutely.
jump.
Just give me a green light and I'll do so. I'll take your advice and I will only see my screen. So let me know if you want me to share it and I'll do so gladly.
So I'm going to share my screen first.
Okay, sure.
And then after I do the introduction, I'll stop sharing my screen and then you can jump in and share yours. So yeah, I'm only gonna wait a few more minutes and get started just because of time wise, I don't really want to go past 7. Yeah, so this is going to be super fun. I definitely have my own questions I brought to the table because, I mean, typography as a whole is a whole thing. I took some classes in college about it, but I'm not the best hand drawing artist. And when I talked to my other friends who were taking typography classes, they said that you really have to have a handle on being able to draw decently, because what the teacher was having them do was literally like create your own font, and they had to hand draw it. And I wasn't, I'm not that good, better digitally. So I just got very scared. I was like, I don't think I'm going to do well in that kind of a class. So it kind of like scared me off, but I watched them and I took other classes, like illustration, etc. But I kind of stuck with when the class was more like digitally based. So diving into Photoshop, how to learn Photoshop, like how to use Illustrator, like all of those things. I was like, yes, I can do that. But when it comes to like actually drawing, I don't have that talent. Like I'd have to really work on it for it to be good.
We can totally talk about that, but you don't need to be a great drawing artist to do type. I've seen people who can barely sketch something and they draw beautiful types. There's this typographer, I think he's from Sweden or one of those northern countries, whose name is Norzi. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing his surname. And he actually has this method where you don't really have to draw the type, but you just sketch the thickness and the general structure of it, and you then you'll draw it completely and properly in the computer. But the main aspects are super roughly sketched, and you just go on with that. Then there's other people who can draw beautiful stuff out with pencil and pen and I don't know, brush pens and everything. You've got everything around there. So don't worry, if you want to draw type, you can totally do so without being a master of the pencil at all. I'm not so great at all. I mean, I feel more comfortable with the computer too.
That makes me feel a lot more confident, because it was kind of disappointing to come to like have that experience in college, especially because I think at that age I was still really young. I was like 19, so like I got kind of like scared off easy, like, oh, I don't know, like I don't want to fail this class. You don't want to take a class you think you're gonna fail. So it was and then all my friends who were taking that class was like very artistically inclined, so I was like, ugh, they're really good, like they're already really good at this, like what? I don't know. I think I just had to like get out of my comfort zone and be okay with, which I think I am now. I think that just takes time, like learning programs and learning new skills. And then you kind of realize that no matter what, that if you do something long enough, you can get good at it.
I'm totally in that with you, yes. It's just a matter of time. Some of us take longer. There are some that actually do it in 2 months and they do it greatly. But absolutely, yes. With enough time, I'm pretty sure almost anyone can master almost anything. It's not so tough.
So I'm gonna get started, and anybody else that wants to join in, of course, the room is open. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm so happy to have you here. We are in Creative Company, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about us before we get started with Isa. So, we are mostly women creatives, coworkers, collaborators, and community members that work together in the co. And so what we like to do is really be our most creative self. Like that is definitely something that I aspire to be. And I really hope that everybody within in Creative Company is inspired as well. So let me dive into exactly what type of people are in Creative Company. So we all work remotely. COVID definitely was a push for all of us to work remotely. Before COVID, I was in an office. Then I created a home office, and that's basically where I'm going to stay. And we're making it the best it can be. So some of our digital creatives are animators, art directors, social media managers, SEO, strategists, graphic designers, cartoonists, illustrators, web designers, and so much more. And we're getting more and more people within the community every day. So if you are a creative and you're looking for structure, inspiration, insight, just a support system, like we are definitely something that could work with you. So let me start to explain exactly what this all means. So we're super flexible, and that's really the core of it, is that life changes, life can change. And so what we're doing is trying to have something that can grow with you no matter what stage you are in your life. That's really the whole core of it, is we've got to be flexible together to be able to grow together. And so that's the structure. It's super flexible. I really just want everybody to feel like they're achieving their dreams and doing their best and being creative. So this is a little bit more of a breakdown of the types of people that we have within. So strategy, creative, production, analysis, management, really everything you can think of. Super eclectic group. Everybody is like-minded. Everybody is working on different projects, whether together or separate. And it's just an inclusive place to ask questions, feel supportive, understand something new, understand what's going on, especially like Instagram just added reels. Like, what is that all about? So just figuring it all out and seeing exactly what we can do together. So the way that our workflow is when somebody has a project, they become the core lead and they bring on collaborators depending on what that project needs. So let's say I bring on a project and I need an SEO specialist. I put a call out, like, who is an SEO specialist that's available to work on this project with me? So it's pretty free form. You don't have to join in on a project, but if you do, like, that's awesome. And that's the structure, really. It's just helping us achieve what we can and really giving the client the best possible outcome and the best thing it could be. So really, that's I'm a humanitarian, really, at heart, like completely a humanitarian, and I really just want to see people feel supported, have a structure, and also be able to bring in other people flexibly depending on what their client needs. So the creative flow is also another thing that I've talked extensively with Yelly, is that we ebb and we flow. And you can't always expect your creativity to be on point. You do need to also fill your own cup. And so one of the reasons why I felt like this is different than an agency is that it's not mandatory for you to be on projects. It's not mandatory for you to participate 24/7. It's really when you feel inspired, when it feels good. And then when you need to take a break, go on a hike, like, yeah, go do that. Like, work-life balance is extremely important. Burnout's not necessary. And that's just not what I want. And that's really not what anybody should have in their life. Like, burnout is just, forget about that. So meet the co-founders. I am one of them. Yelly is also the co-founder. And we really just want to make this like the most positive, inspiring community possible. And it's all a work in progress. And ever since we created this, it's been nothing but a blessing. So I really appreciate everybody that's joining us on this workshop, because this is literally my dreams coming true. So just thank you for being here and being a part of this. So tonight we have a amazing typographer, Isa. Definitely follow her on Instagram, find her on LinkedIn, and check out her portfolio. When you need typography, she is your go-to. She does beautiful work. I'm super excited to hear what she has to say about this topic. And this is what we do. We share, we inspire, we grow, and we have other events coming up next week and then the next week before that, and so on. So hop over to our Facebook, check out our Instagram, connect with us. And if you are a creative and you are looking for this in your life, join us. We have open enrollment right now. The sign-up form is on increative.co, and we're ready to have you join us. And we're adding in members every day. So why not? Why not check it out? If you have any questions, of course, you can email us at connect@increative.co with your questions, and let's get started. So I'm going to hand it over to Isa so you can share your screen and jump in. Also, before Isa starts, we're taking questions at the end. So when you have a question, put it in the chat and I'll direct it over to Isa. So I'm the moderator, and we're just gonna keep it like that to keep it like clear and succinct. So everybody stay on mute, and we're going to hand it over to Isa. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Drea, for that great introduction, and thanks everyone for being here. I just want to check, are you seeing my screen right now?
Yes.
Yes, you are? Great. First of all, a small disclaimer. And Drea will be sharing this presentation later with you today, because there's some links and hyperlinks with bibliography and sources you might want to check if you become really interested in any of the topics I will be mentioning. Feel free to check them if you wish, and if you want more information, I will gladly provide it to you if I can, of course. I'm always glad to talk about typography, so feel free to do so, and to write me if you want some extra data. The main topics I'll be talking about in this presentation will be divided in four sections, which might or might not seem related amongst them, but what I believe make us as typography users better designers or better communicators, because in the end, typography is about communicating. Design is about communicating, but typography as a specifics, it's meant to be to communicate a message, literally words. I'll be talking mainly about medium and large text typography for medium and large text extensions, because I believe those are the hardest or the most difficult texts to work with when you work with big letters, like you can read here, typography. Most readers will read it without much trouble, but when you have to deal with more information in smaller sizes, well, things can get a bit trickier. So I'll be keeping that in mind. And please just write down any questions you have, and I'll be glad to answer them, or search for the answer and get back to you in a couple of days if I don't know the answer. I mean, I'm not the god of typography at all. I love it, but there's lots of things I still need to learn. One last thing I would like to clarify, and I will do so along the presentation. Everything I'll be saying now, the rules I'll be sharing now, they're not really rules, they are suggestions. Those of you who work as designers, no matter in which area, you might already know that there are no goods and rights in design. There are suggestions and generalities you can take into consideration, but for each project, each problem you have to solve, there's always a lot of aspects you need to consider, and well, there comes in the designer's own criteria. So everything I say here, yes, they are generalities, but I'll try to keep in mind and to remind you that there's nothing written in stone and there's always exceptions to everything. Anyway, well, here we go. The main units I'll be addressing here will be fonts on screen and hinting, because well, in the code, there's lots of people who work with social media and digital environments, and I think this will be might come in handy, this small knowledge. And then I'll talk about diversity, language, and typography, which is something at least I tend to forget a lot, and it helps me to keep in mind. And diversity regarding visual impairments, dyslexia, and blindness in general. These three things have three different ways to make the reader more comfortable, and at last, good practices. And we'll see that point 3 and 4 are actually really pretty much the same in a way. So here we go. Fonts on screen and hinting. So when a type designer, a typographer designs a letter, they will actually open the typography software, and they will draw it with Bezier curves. If anyone has worked with Illustrator or Inkscape, they probably know what they are, or they have dealt with them. These little curves, it doesn't really matter how much you know about them. The important thing is that you can actually draw a curve or a diagonal. It's there, and that's beautiful, and they're super precise. You grow to love them. They can be a little bit tricky in the beginning, but then you learn that there's a whole world of solutions within them. The thing is, once you've drawn this little beautiful glyph that took you hours to just solve it, then your display that works in pixels does this. It's got this perpendicular grid, and man, it's got no curves. I mean, you've been working a lot to get the curves right, and it doesn't work. And so what the computer does, the software does actually, is hinting. Hinting is this super complicated process where it actually puts some little dots where the ink should be, and then it will translate it to pixels. The thing is, any type design software such as Glyphs or FontLab will do some automatic hinting that's pretty decent, but in order to do it right, and I mean really, really right, there's specialists. There's people who actually work doing this. They will take some typographer design, and their work will be to adjust the hinting. This might not be a big issue for big headlines like fonts on screen, where the letters, the characters are huge. But when we start working on small fonts, smaller fonts, this starts getting a bit trickier. Here, what I can say is that when you get to work on screen, I would suggest, as a generality, to choose sans serif fonts, because you might not be able to avoid having an O or an S or an A, but you can surely avoid having extra serifs that will probably have curves or diagonals within their structure. That being said, there are great serif fonts meant for computers, such as Roboto Slab, which you can find in Google Fonts, or Bookerly, which is Kindle's costume designed font by Dalton Mag, which is awesome. But well, those are very specific fonts designed for screen. Always, if you can choose, I would suggest you choose a font designed screen, because they will have a lot of adjustments, not only hinting. We'll see that by the end of the presentation. Next, diversity and language. Okay, here's a fun fact you probably already know, and you haven't actually stopped thinking about it. Just think about it. At least I knew it, but when they told this to me, I was like, oh God, I've never thought about it. Here we go. So this is the amount of people who speak the 10 most spoken languages. Yes? Now, one half of the pie chart, well, not one half, but the pink side of the pie chart is for certain kind of speakers and the gray one for another kind of speakers. And I divided it between Latin and non-Latin speakers. The thing is that more than 70% of the speakers speak non-Latin languages. This means that these languages are not written with our regular or our known alphabet, the ABC we've learned at school. They write with different kind of letters. I mean, they're not worse or better, they just work with different letters, and our types, they simply don't work for them. They are, I mean, if you get your regular, I don't know, the font I used for the headlines, for instance, it simply won't write in Japanese, as an example. Now, if we get to Google Fonts, which was actually has actually a small amount of fonts, but they are freelance licensed, and actually Google has kind of an interesting project trying to develop this or foment this kind of thing. We will see that for the 999 fonts Google has, the total, 100% of them can write in proper English. I mean proper English, uppercase, lowercase, apostrophe, dot, full stop, etc. About 2/3 of them can speak in other languages, Spanish, for instance, or German or French, I don't know. And only 45 will be able to write in Devanagari. 9 have support Chinese characters. 9. I mean, in the pie chart from the left, there are more Chinese, Mandarin Chinese speakers than the whole lot of Latin speakers in the world. That's a huge thing. If you actually compare it like pie chart versus pie chart, it means that for that huge 70%, more than 70%, we only have that little pieces of fonts for people to choose from. In Google, I mean, in my fonts you will have a bit more, but probably not much. What can we do about it? I mean, as designers, there's not much we can do unless we want to create tapes for other languages, but we can at least try to use these fonts. I mean, the fonts that Google distributes have this amazing project or amazing quality that they would be designed to work with Latin and non-Latin scripts. You can actually use the same font and it will have all the glyphs needed. I think that's a marvelous thing, and we should not oversee that. If you have to work for, I don't know, a Chinese client or and they have their own community where you live, maybe they even want to have their design in both languages, and that's something we should not take for granted. I mean, I have always known that Chinese is the most spoken language. I take that as an example, but Japanese was something that surprised me. But I never stopped to think how little fonts we have to choose from when we want to read Chinese. Of course, I don't really know Chinese. I can't speak it at all, but I kind of think we should keep that in mind. So next comes blindness and other visual impairments and dyslexia, which is not a visual impairment, and we'll talk about it later. Blindness is actually a huge barrier for a typographer. We work with sight, that's undeniable, and when someone can't see or can barely see because there are some degrees of blindness, that makes our job, or that we might think our job is not actually targeted for them. But the fact is that might not be like that. This is the latest project I found, trying to mingle traditional type with Braille, the Braille system. It was done by a Japanese typographer. I can never remind his name, but I think it's beautiful. You just print the type and you overprint the Braille on top of it. This project is actually based, or strongly based, on a Spanish type designer called Nuria Lopez, who basically took the same approach. I think the nice thing about this project is that it includes a bit of this language diversity tube, since it's meant to write also in Japanese. So I think it's a step forward towards equality and diversity. And well, and it's kind of a beautiful type. Of course, got a lot of a really special style, but I think it can actually work. And okay, it's still in progress. We can't use it right now. Aging and visual impairments. Well, I use glasses, and I've been using them for all my life, so I'm kind of pretty aware of how this thing works. The thing is that, well, most of us will end up using glasses probably, because as we get older, we lose the ability to focus. The eye is a muscle, so we lose strength in a way. And also our eye pupil, it starts shrinking a little bit. So the light we can get in also decreases a bit. As a result of this, we lose the ability to read as well as we did before. In some cases, like mine, I was born with a little bit less ability, but that's pretty much the same result. The thing is, we can do things to improve the readability of a text for people who, for one reason or another, need this to be done. There are 3 things we can do. There are partial solutions, of course. The first one will be not type related, and it will be design-wise, if you want. It has to do with the contrast. If this is quite obvious too, but if we write a black font over white background, the contrast will be optimal. The other way around won't work, like a really soft gray over a white background. This, of course, is super clear when we work in black and white, but when we use color shades, that should also be taken into consideration. Another thing we can do is take care of the strokes. There are some types, like we can see here, I don't know if you see my mouse, that have these really thick strokes and the vertical lines, and really thin strokes for the horizontal ones. They're really beautiful, super elegant, but when you lose a little bit of focus, you start seeing the thick strokes, and the thinner ones kind of get loose. For people who can't focus really well, or who have any kind of visual impairment, more or less, a more solid stroke that's continuous throughout the type and has small adjustments, because strokes always have adjustments in type, they work much nicer. And the last thing we have to take into consideration is the proportions of a type. Type proportions, I don't know if you've seen my t-shirt, depends on ascenders and descenders, which are the strokes that go above and below the height of X. And it also has to do with the relation, the height and the width of its character. For instance, in this word, ascender, you will notice that the typography above has an end that's, I wouldn't say it's a square, but it's more square-like than the one that's below. That kind of condensed proportion or too extended proportion also is harder to read. I want to say, as small disclaimer, these generalities I just pointed out as partial solution also make a text easier to read or more comfortable to read for anyone. I mean, you can have the side of an eagle, and that the text will be nicer or prettier to read if you keep these things in mind. So that's it. It's not a solution for someone who wears glasses. It's actually an advice for any text you have to write. And last but not least, dyslexia. Dyslexia is not related to your eye muscle as any aging problem or any aging condition. It's related on how your brain actually processes this information. It's a really, really interesting subject, and there are some papers online you can actually read about them. The papers are not really conclusive on all the things, but one thing I did came across, I did conclude from reading them, is that font types have a significant impact on readability for people with dyslexia. The paper actually said that. That's a literal quote. But one thing I couldn't help thinking is that whoever wrote that paper is not a typographer or type designer or even a graphic designer, because font types have a significant impact on readability, period. I mean, for anyone, just as I mentioned the things before about aging and everything, like if you want to read a text written in, I don't know, a really complicated type, you won't be able to read it comfortably, no matter if you have or if you don't have dyslexia. So just keep that in mind. There are certain times, and I'll be talking about it in just a sec, that are meant to help people with dyslexia. Some of the studies say they help a bit, some say they don't, but it's like two things, the differentiation. And I do have a theory about everything, after reading a bit. One thing these studies agree upon is that italics are actually a bit more complicated for dyslexics, people with dyslexia to read. Their regular counterparts seem to be a little bit more easier to read, either sans serif and monospaced. So this is my theory. We've got these great projects that are meant to be facilitators for people with dyslexia to be reading. The hypothesis they were designed upon is that when someone with dyslexia actually reads, they tend to confuse certain signs that are quite similar. For instance, the P and Q, they are pretty much the same character, but in a mirror reflected kind of way, or the E and A. So what they'll do is to put some certain little blob over here, extra weight over there. So when the eye goes through the whole text, the reader will say, okay, this is a Q. And that will be quite a quick thing. So let me go a little bit before. What happens with the italics is that the whole letter structure is much more similar for each one of them. The O, the E, and the A, for instance, they are drawn with the same oval shaped kind of structure. And that happens with most of the letters. So I believe there's some truth underneath, underlying all these kind of things. And that's why the regular fonts are much more easier to read. Another disclaimer, it would be hard to read a whole text in italics for any one of us. It doesn't matter if we have dyslexia or not. So once again, this particularity is actually a generality. I wouldn't recommend anyone writing a text in italics. We are not used to it and it's harder for us. So that's pretty much it for diversity. And last but not least, here we go with good practices. These practices, let me assure you, are not stone written rules, and I believe will help any reader. It doesn't matter if they do or do not have dyslexia, if they do or do not wear glasses. I mean, our job as a designer, I believe, is to make people's life easier, no matter who they are. So these practices, I think, might help the readers feel a little bit more comfortable. The case, people actually love using uppercase. The thing is that uppercase letters have a much more similar structure between themselves. They can be written in a square or rectangle, while lowercase have much different kind of structures to them. So if part of the letters are covered by any reason, either physical or God knows what, the lowercase word would be much more easily recognized than the uppercase one. Another thing we have is that lowercase letters, words actually, they create an irregular shape, while uppercase, of course, they don't. And I'm pretty sure some of you might have heard we don't really read letters, we read words. And when we say this I don't know, amorphic or irregular kind of shape, it's much easier for our brain to identify the word than if we just see this blocks of regular squares or rectangles going all around. So lowercase words are actually much more advisable. Of course, when we are designing, I don't know, a brand, a big billboard or anything, they do have some issues because since they've got ascenders and descenders, you have to make them actually fit, and well, that's another kind of thing. And once again, there goes the criteria. What would you like to be your main objective in this kind of thing? If you would like to put everything in a huge block, well, maybe lowercase will be kind of a mess you don't want to get into. Proportions. I'm back with this because proportions is everything with type. The studies I mentioned about dyslexia, most of them compare the dyslexia friendly fonts with Helvetica. And that's one of the reasons I also think that whoever wrote it is not actually a typographer or a designer. Helvetica is a beautiful font, and I think no one will question me on that, but it's definitely not a really, really good font to read. The main reason is that if you actually see the terminals of the strokes, they kind of close in the sign, like you can see in the E and in the A, that you have a really small space where air can get into. On the right side, you have the sans, which is also sans serif font, but from another style. It's a humanist sans serif. And you'll see that the E and A has a lot of air, to get into. Also, the waist will be much more similar for all the letters in Helvetica, while the sans got different weights for E and A. And the waist will be a little bit upper, in the upper half for the E and the lower for the A. That will also make the letters a little bit more different amongst each other. Once again, think about the dyslexia-friendly fonts. They also try to make different kind of details for each of the glyphs. So I'm pretty sure the sans could be a good font too. And last but not least, the general structure. You will see that ascenders are a little bit smaller in Helvetica than in the sans. The black line is actually Helvetica's height and in ascenders and the X height, and the pink one is the one for the sans. It's a little bit longer, but when we're talking about type, these small subtleties, they're everything. I mean, that's the difference between a really, really good font for a book or, I don't know, a long post, and, well, a font that might be a pain in the eye. So the last thing I want to share with you is our two small rules you might want to take into consideration when writing medium or long text for screen, mainly. The first one is, well, this one I wrote it with a little bit of poetry. Tracking makes the world go round. That's mainly true for non-screen meant fonts. When you use a font meant for printing, which is actually like 70% of the fonts comfortably, you will have to adjust the tracking because the digital screens actually require a little bit more effort for our eyes. So you will have to open the tracking a little bit. It might look a little bit too wide for regular printing, but for screen it will work beautifully. You can see here the example, the first two examples that say San Francisco. This is San Francisco font for Apple. The first one is San Francisco Display, which is meant for headlines in big size font, while the second one is San Francisco Text. I did not touch the tracking between the two of them, but well, given Apple has great typographers in their team, it should not come unnoticed that they actually chose for the text variable, the text font, a wider tracking. You actually type it and it's way wider. The text you can see on the right, the little paragraph over there in Latin, that's San Francisco without anything. I mean, just typed it and put it there, nothing added to it. Other thing I would like to share is the character line, the characters per line. Robert Berngus Gerstas, another surname I can never say, actually states that the line should have among 60 or 66 characters per line. For web display or for digital display, that's a little bit too much, so a 10% less can actually work and do wonders for the reader and for the whole piece. So once again, keep this in mind as a general rule. Maybe you want to use a super huge font for a website splash page, and that would be awesome, and that might look just great. But this might also come in handy if you are designing, I don't know, the UX of an app, for instance. And well, I would like to close this small talk with this quote I found while doing some research. Is from Nuria Lopez, the typographer or graphic designer I mentioned before with the blindness braille type. I just loved it. I think that's how we should approach designing. We should design for a vast majority, but we must not stop thinking about minorities. Our design must not be biased and must not ignore that there are people who need to be included, must not exclude, that's exactly what I wanted to say, must not exclude anyone. And by not excluding anyone, we will be designing for majorities. These are not actually, they are not opposites. The more inclusive our design is, the more people who will feel comfortable using it. Well, that's pretty much everything I had to say. Thank you very much for being such a great public audience. And thanks to the Go. I absolutely love what the Go is doing. And well, do check their website because it's awesome. The job they're doing is what we are doing in a way. It's great. Thanks, Ayla and Andrea.
All right. Thank you so much. Wow, that was a lot to go through. You are super in depth, and I learned so much. And wow, so I have my own questions, but we are going to first. We had a request actually from our In Creative Company co-member Ozzy. We want to see your shirt, Isa. So show us typography.
It's my type nerd shirt.
Oh, that is so cool. What is
it? The great brown fox jumps over a lazy dog, which is one of those sentences, I don't know how they're called in English, just got all the alphabet in it. And it's got some type anatomy, little kind of notes over there. I thought it would do nice to have it in this talk.
It's perfect. I love it. It's so cool. I definitely need to pick up one for myself. It's one of those shirts where it's like when you see somebody wearing it, it's like you get it. You know, it's really sweet. So I have another question also from Ozzy. What are those 8 types that offer support for all languages in Google Fonts?
Oof, I should start them, but you can actually go to fonts.google.com and you can choose the language. And that's where you'll see which are those 9 fonts that actually can write in all of them. I'll check them, I'll send it right there, but I don't know them by heart.
Okay, cool. So we'll dive into that and do the research after. It's definitely a great question. It's one of those things I wish I considered more often. And you're absolutely right. Readability is everything. So our next question is from Yeli, our co-founder. So where do we find accessible typefaces? I want to change my websites to these and my brand fonts.
Well, Google's got a lot of them and they are license free. So I would suggest that. And they're really easy to use for website. Ozzy is the expert on website accessibility because it's not only a font related issue, but yes, Google Fonts is actually my main source for license free and easy to use and accessible web fonts.
Cool. Yeah, so I definitely need to check that out as well. And while you were speaking, I was wondering, what's your personal favorite sans serif font and serif font?
Well, I've been quite in love with the font I used for this presentation, which is Allegria. It's made from an Argentine designer, type designer did it, and well, it's kind of beautiful. It's got little tiny details that makes it beautiful. The sans serif's got a little bit of emphasis that which doesn't make the stroke so rigid. And they got a lot of variables. They have the from light to black and small case, everything. I actually like it a lot, and it writes really beautiful in longer texts.
So we have more questions coming in. Everyone's super hopped up about this. We have so much to talk about. I don't know if I've ever seen Allegria though. Like I need to check that out. Yeli says that it's beautiful, so I definitely need to get on the Allegria chain. So all right, Annette, who is our co-member as well. What's your most annoying thing you see about fonts that people choose for their social account or their social content or ads?
Well, this doesn't really happen so much in English because most fonts are actually support English, but I see a lot of people who use a font that doesn't have, I don't know, accents for Spanish flyers or social media, and the font will, the software will automatically change, for instance, an accented O for another font, and that's like, oh please, just choose the font you can use for this. Just that, check that the font can write in language you have to use. Only that.
Yeah, so why is English so English you said is the most accessible font? Why is that?
Oof, I think there are two things that converge there. The first thing is that internet, I think, is mostly written in English. So many font designers and typographers actually write in English, and that's it. And the second is that English needs less characters to be correctly written than Spanish or French or Portuguese, which have like special characters, accent. I don't know how you call it. Well, the little thing below the C, we call it sedilla. I'm not sure the word in English. So that's partially because of some sort of cultural bias, and the other part is because it's actually easier.
So we have more questions coming through, and it's getting close to 7, so I'm going to try to get through them. Another question from Ozzy. Ozzy is one of our graphic designers, so we have a lot of members in the co, and Ozzy is our core graphic designer. So let me see what the question is. What are your thoughts as a typographer about Comic Sans?
Well, I think it's got a worse publicity than what it deserves. There are way worse fonts than Comic Sans, absolutely. I think in the 90s, people actually used it a bit, but I don't think it deserves all the hatred it's got in the last few years. Certainly don't think. Yeah, Papyrus actually it's been overused lately. I prefer Comic Sans to Papyrus if I had to choose.
There is a lot of talk about that specific typeface, which I think is super interesting. It's one of those things like it got a lot of bad press for some reason. I wonder where that all started. Real quick, we have another question from Yeli. So her question is, those fonts that adjust with a website, variable fonts, are they being used?
Well, variable fonts, they don't adjust with the website. It's actually a technology that they tried to use some good years ago, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. Fonts are done with these little nodes you've seen in the Bezier curves, and you can actually move them, and you have the lighter version and the black version and all the whites in between. The variable fonts are prepared in a way that the user, the designer in our case, can actually set it through the software, Illustrator, for instance. So instead of having light, regular, and bold, you can have light, semi-light, regular, semi-bold, and black, and then every weight in between. The sans, the font I used in one of the examples, is actually a font that's made interpoling, I think that's the word in English, this kind of information. Variable fonts allow you to do that through software. The thing is, I think it wasn't really successful in the moment because designers weren't ready. We'll see if we are now. That's the main thing I have to say. If we know how to use them wisely, they will succeed. If not, they won't, because it's in our end of the power is ours now. I hope they do, because instead of having 3 weights, you can have a lot of them, and that's great.
That's something that I need to take in consideration, especially the readability, because I do have clients of all different demographics. And when I first took this one client, that the demographic is a lot older. So think like 50 plus. And when I first started doing things for them, right away, I got comments of I can't read it. And at first I'm thinking, what? Like you can't read? Like what? And then I realized through like this trial and error that readability is a huge factor for that entire demographic. So like everything that I make, I have to have that constantly in mind, that it's got to be, you know, the like the contrast, super high contrast, so like white on black, or like white on navy, like just very, very high contrast. Sans serif definitely works better, like you said. Like, and it's really great to hear you actually lay it out, because I was kind of figuring this out on my own with doing like limited research, and to hear you actually say it was like, okay, so these situations I've had make sense. Like this all makes sense, and all of these resources definitely help tremendously. So we have another question from Ozzy. All right. What is the golden rule you use for font size, line height for web and print, if any?
No golden rule. Softwares are in Design Illustrator are set to have 120% line height to body. But it always will depend on the fonts, because there are fonts that will need a little bit more. Normally they won't need less. I actually like a little bit open the line height, especially in not too long texts, where you don't need to be so scarce with the space. I mean, if it's a book, you might want to be a little bit more frugal with the page use, but if not, I like to be a little bit generous about it. Not too much that the text breaks apart, but in order to make it comfortable for the reader. Sorry, Elsie, I don't have actually a aurea proportion for this.
It's an interesting way to look at it, and I mean it's hard. It's definitely, at least for me, Chelsea, one of our co-members, so has a really great tip. There are free readability test tools online too that will test the font size and background color for accessibility on sites before deployment, which is super helpful. This is all something that I need to dive into a ton further, because if people can't read it, you're not getting the message across, like point blank.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy your ending quote, because it's a great mindset just in design in general. Overall, when you're thinking of the minority, you are creating for the majority. So that's just something I want to take into my everyday life. Now that you've said that, like, I just want to put that everywhere.
Yes, I actually loved it. When I found it, I thought it was like, that was exactly what I wanted to communicate, to transmit through this little presentation. yes, it summarizes a lot of what I think about design should be, actually. So that's it. You've been great, all of you, like an awesome public. Thanks a lot once again for having me here.
Thank you so much, everyone. Your questions were awesome. We enjoyed everybody coming and doing this with us. Isa, you did an amazing job. Seriously, I'm so impressed. Everybody is applauding you right now in the chat. And I'm so excited to really dive into this further. Everybody, I'm going to share this presentation with you so that you can see it and use it, and we can talk about this further in the Slack, because this is definitely something that we come across daily. So let's dive into it. Let's see what we can do. And Isa, thank you so much for having me look at things differently, open my eyes. And this is what we're about. So I just feel so fulfilled right now, and I appreciate you doing this with us. Anybody that has questions later on, you think of it, throw it in the Slack. We definitely have, this is an ongoing conversation for us. And I appreciate all of you attending tonight. So, let's dive into this. And anybody that finds a really great font, like, please share it. Like, please, that just helps so much when we find something that works, especially because there's so many options. I personally get overwhelmed by the amount of options. So this is great. And thank you everybody. I'm gonna stop the recording.